I thought I'd found peace again. I thought Nari was my reward for surviving all the loneliness. But she was never mine. She belonged to another world, and I only saw the truth when I had nothing left to give. A few mornings ago, I got an email from a longtime viewer of this channel. He told me he's been watching quietly for months, just listening, trying to make sense of his own story through mine. He wrote, "I stayed in the relationship longer than I should have because I kept telling myself it would turn around, but it never did, and now I don't even recognize the man in the mirror." That message, it did something to me. I sat there for a while just staring out the window, because I remembered that same feeling, that quiet, sinking disbelief when you realize the dream you built your life around wasn't real. When you gave your heart, your time, your future, and all it did was disappear into someone else's plan. It's like waking up in a place that looks familiar, but nothing fits anymore. And honestly, that's why I keep sharing these stories. Not to vent, not to shame anyone, but because maybe if one of you sees the signs sooner, maybe you won't crash like I did. If this story hits close, even just a little, do me a favor. Hit that like button, leave a comment, and let me know where you're watching from. I read every single one. And to those of you who keep coming back video after video, I want to say something that I don't say enough. Thank you. Seriously. You've helped build a space where men like us can finally speak out loud without feeling stupid for caring too much. I never thought I'd be this open online, but sometimes telling the truth is all we've got left. Let me take you back to where it all started. I can still see her standing there in the morning light, arms stretched toward the sky like she was holding up the world itself. The bamboo floor creaked softly under her bare feet as she moved through the poses, her voice floating across the retreat center like a prayer I didn't know I needed to hear. Breathe in slowly, Doug. Feel your chest expand. Now hold it and release. Her accent made my name sound like music, like something worth saying. I'd been coming to these sessions for 3 weeks, but that morning was different. That morning, I actually felt my lungs fill completely for the first time since Linda left me and my sister died within 6 months of each other. Nari had this way of looking at you when she spoke, like you were the only person in the room that mattered. "You're getting stronger," she said after class, her hand briefly touching my shoulder. "I can see it in your breathing." The other students filed out, chatting about their weekend plans in Chiang Mai, but I stayed. I always stayed. There was something about the way she moved through that space, arranging the mats in perfect rows, dimming the lights with such care, like she understood that sacred things require attention. "Do you want some tea?" she asked, not looking up from her careful arrangement of meditation cushions. "I always make too much." That's how it started. Tea after yoga. Her listening while I talked about Denver, about the insurance claims that used to fill my days with other people's disasters, about how I'd come to Thailand because my therapist said I needed to find myself again. I laughed when I told her that part. "Maybe finding yourself isn't the goal," she said, pouring the tea with steady hands. "Maybe it's learning to lose yourself in something beautiful." I thought she meant the meditation, the breathing, the peaceful mornings. I didn't know yet that she meant her. "Tell me about your family," I said one afternoon, watching her face as she spoke. "There's not much to tell. My parents died when I was young. I've been taking care of myself for a long time." She smiled, but something flickered behind her eyes. "What about you? Do you have children?" Linda and I tried for years. Never happened. Maybe it was for the best, considering how things ended. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, but Nari's presence somehow made it bearable. "Sometimes the universe protects us from things we think we want," she said, her voice so gentle I almost believed it. Those first few weeks, I thought I was learning meditation. I thought I was healing from the divorce, from losing Sharon so suddenly to cancer. But really, I was learning to breathe around the growing space Nari was taking up in my chest. Every morning I'd wake up thinking about her voice, about the way she'd smile when I finally got a pose right, about how she'd tilt her head when she listened to me stumble through my broken stories. "You have kind eyes," she told me one evening as we watched the sunset from the retreat center's garden. I can see why you helped people with their insurance claims. You care about making things right." I wanted to tell her that I'd spent 30 years dealing with people's worst days, that I'd gotten good at staying detached, professional. But when she looked at me like that, I felt like maybe caring wasn't such a dangerous thing after all. "You make me want to be better," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. She reached over and took my hand, her fingers small and warm against mine. "You already are better, Doug. You just forgot for a while." That night, walking back to my rented villa through the humid Chiang Mai streets, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was young. Hope. Real hope. Not the desperate kind that comes from loneliness, but the quiet kind that grows when someone sees you clearly and doesn't look away. I thought she was teaching me how to breathe again. I thought she was showing me how to trust my own heart after Linda had shredded it so completely. I thought the careful way she listened, the gentle way she touched my arm when I said something that made her smile, the patient way she corrected my terrible yoga form, I thought all of that meant something real. I was 63 years old. I should have known better. But when you've been drowning for as long as I had, even an illusion of solid ground feels like salvation. The first time I saw Nari, I was sitting in the back corner of the wellness center, trying to make myself invisible. I'd been in Chiang Mai for exactly 8 days, and I still jumped every time someone spoke to me in Thai. Everything felt too bright, too loud, too foreign. I was running from a life that had collapsed so completely I couldn't figure out how to build a new one. "First time?" she asked, settling onto the mat next to mine. Her English was careful, precise, like she'd practiced each word. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I hadn't had a real conversation with another human being in weeks. Linda's lawyer had done most of the talking during the divorce proceedings, and after Sharon's funeral, I'd stopped answering my phone altogether. "I'm Nari. I teach the morning classes. What's your name?" "Doug. Douglas Whitman." My voice came out rough, unused. "Doug?" she repeated, like she was testing how it felt in her mouth. "That's a strong name. You look like you need something gentle, though." She was right. I needed gentle, like a drowning man needs air. The past year had been nothing but sharp edges, Linda's accusations, Sharon's chemotherapy, the endless paperwork that comes with divorce and death. I'd come to Thailand because my sister had always talked about visiting Asia, and after she died, I thought maybe I could see it for both of us. "Have you done yoga before?" Nari asked, unrolling her mat with practiced efficiency. "No. My ex-wife tried to get me to go to classes back in Denver, but I always found excuses." I managed a weak smile. Figured I'd run out of excuses here. Good. Fresh start. Sometimes that's exactly what we need. The class was small, just 6 people including me. Nari moved between us like she was conducting a quiet orchestra, adjusting poses with gentle hands, offering modifications when someone struggled. When she got to me, fumbling through what was supposed to be a simple stretch, she knelt beside my mat. "Don't force it," she said, her hand warm on my back. "Your body is holding a lot of tension. Let it go slowly." I wanted to tell her that my body was holding 40 years of sitting at a desk, a year of sleeping on a friend's couch during the divorce, months of hospital chairs watching my sister fade away. Instead, I just nodded and tried to breathe the way she was teaching us. After class, she approached me while I was struggling to roll up my borrowed mat. "You did well for your first time. Most men your age won't even try." "Most men my age probably have better sense," I said, finally getting the mat into something resembling a cylinder. She laughed, a sound like water over stones. "Sense is overrated. How long are you staying in Chiang Mai?" "I don't know. I bought a one-way ticket." The admission felt strange in my mouth. I'd never been the kind of man who didn't have a plan. "That's brave." "That's desperate," I corrected her. "Sometimes they're the same thing." We walked outside together into the humid embrace of a Thai morning. The street was already alive with scooters and food vendors, the air thick with cooking oil and incense from a nearby temple. Everything felt overwhelming and comforting at the same time. Would you like to get coffee? She asked. I know a place that serves American breakfast if you're homesick. I almost said no. I'd been saying no to everything for months, dinner invitations from well-meaning friends, dates my coworkers tried to set up, anything that required me to pretend I was okay. But something about Nari made pretending feel unnecessary. I'd like that, I said. The coffee shop was small and dim, tucked between a massage parlor and a shop selling Buddhist artifacts. Nari ordered for both of us in rapid Thai, then turned back to me with an apologetic smile. I got you eggs and toast. Safe choice for Americans. How do you know so much about Americans? I've taught yoga to a lot of tourists over the years, mostly people running from something. She studied my face carefully. What are you running from, Doug? The question should have felt invasive, but her voice was so gentle, so genuinely curious, that I found myself answering honestly. My wife left me for her personal trainer. Classic, right? 40 years of marriage, and she said I'd become emotionally unavailable. Then my sister died of cancer 3 months later. She was the only family I had left. I stirred sugar into my coffee, watching the crystals dissolve. I guess I'm running from the fact that at 63, I have no idea who I'm supposed to be anymore. Nari was quiet for a long moment, her small hands wrapped around her coffee cup. I'm sorry about your sister. Losing family is the hardest kind of grief. Did you lose your parents young? I asked, remembering what she'd mentioned briefly in class. When I was 16. Car accident. I had to figure out how to take care of myself pretty quickly. Her voice stayed steady, but I caught something flickering in her expression. Maybe that's why I like helping people find their balance. I know what it feels like to have the ground disappear under your feet. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the street life through the cafe's open front. I felt something loosening in my chest, some knot of tension I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. Will you come to class tomorrow? She asked as we prepared to leave. If you'll have me. I'm not exactly a natural. None of us are naturals at the beginning. That's why they call it practice. Walking back to my villa, I realized I was looking forward to something for the first time in months. Not just the yoga, but the prospect of seeing Nari again, of being in the presence of someone who seemed to understand that healing happens slowly, carefully, one breath at a time. I didn't know then that she was studying me as carefully as I was studying her. I didn't know that my vulnerability, my obvious need for gentleness, my grateful response to the smallest kindness, I didn't know that all of those things were exactly what she was looking for. 3 weeks into our routine, Nari started staying after our coffee conversations. Not going anywhere, just sitting with me in the small garden behind the wellness center, talking about everything and nothing. I'd tell her about my work in Denver, about the claims I'd investigated, the families I'd helped rebuild after disasters. She'd listen with the kind of attention that made me feel like my boring stories were actually interesting. You have a good heart, Doug, she said one afternoon, her head resting against my shoulder as we watched the koi swimming in the center's small pond. I can tell you really cared about helping people. I used to think I did, but Linda said I cared more about strangers than I did about her. The old guilt was still there, but it felt different when I talked about it with Nari. Less sharp. Maybe Linda didn't understand that caring for others comes from the same place as caring for family. Some people see love as limited, like there's only so much to go around. She lifted her head to look at me. I don't think love works that way. How do you think it works? I think the more you give, the more you have. Her smile was soft, almost shy. I never felt safe enough with anyone to give very much before. That night, she came back to my villa for the first time. Nothing dramatic, nothing planned. We'd been walking through the night market, sharing a bag of mango sticky rice when it started raining. Not the gentle drizzle I was used to from Denver, but a proper Thai downpour that soaked us both in seconds. My apartment is 20 minutes away, she said, laughing as water streamed down her face. Yours is 5. We ran through the rain, splashing through puddles like teenagers, arriving at my front door breathless and dripping. I handed her a towel and made tea while she wrung out her hair in my bathroom. When she emerged, wearing one of my old t-shirts that hung to her knees, I felt something shift in my chest. "This is nice," she said, looking around my simple living room with its rented furniture and carefully maintained distance from anything that might feel like home. "It feels peaceful. It's temporary, just until I figure out what comes next." "Maybe temporary is exactly what you need right now." She curled up on the couch next to me, her small body radiating warmth. "I've been thinking about your question, about how love works. And I think real love makes people braver. It makes them want to build something together instead of just surviving alone." We talked until 3 in the morning, her voice weaving through stories about her childhood, about learning to be independent, about her dreams of expanding the wellness center into something bigger. When she finally fell asleep against my shoulder, I stayed awake listening to her breathe, afraid to move and break whatever spell had brought her here. She started staying over regularly after that, never asking, never assuming, just appearing at my door with groceries or a bottle of wine, making herself at home in my temporary space with an ease that made it feel less temporary. "I've been thinking about that expansion," she said one evening, her laptop open on my kitchen table, showing me website mock-ups for a larger retreat center. "What if we could offer week-long programs? Meditation, yoga, maybe some counseling for people dealing with major life transitions." "We?" I asked, though my heart was already racing at the pronoun. "I mean, if you wanted to be involved, you understand how to help people navigate difficult situations. Your insurance background, your natural empathy." She looked up at me hopefully. "I could never afford to do this alone, but with a partner, someone who believes in the vision." I studied the mock-ups, the carefully planned layout of meditation spaces and private consultation rooms. It looked professional, thoughtful, exactly the kind of place I would have wanted to find when I first arrived in Thailand, broken and lost. How much would something like this cost to get started? The land lease and initial renovations would be about 2 million baht, maybe 2.5, with all the equipment and marketing. She pulled up a spreadsheet, numbers laid out in neat columns. "I've saved about 300,000, but I could cover the rest," I said before I could stop myself. "I mean, if we're really talking about a partnership." Her face lit up like I'd just handed her the moon. "Doug, are you serious? You'd really want to do this with me? I've been looking for a reason to stay in Thailand permanently. This could be it." She launched herself into my arms, covering my face with kisses, talking rapidly about permits and contractors and the perfect location she'd found near the mountains. I held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling more alive than I had in years. "We'll need to set up the business structure carefully," I said, my practical side kicking in despite the euphoria. "Make sure everything's legal and protected." "Of course. I'll handle all the local requirements. You just focus on the vision, on making this place everything we dreamed." She pulled back to look at me, her eyes bright with excitement. I can't believe this is really happening. Neither could I. 3 months ago, I'd been sleeping on a friend's couch in Denver, wondering if I'd ever feel hopeful about anything again. Now I was planning a future with a woman who saw potential in both me and the dreams I'd forgotten I had. The first time I wired money to her account, 500,000 baht for the land deposit, she cried. Actually cried, standing in the bank lobby with tears streaming down her face. "No one has ever believed in me like this," she whispered, her arms around my neck. "I won't let you down, Doug. I promise." I should have paid more attention to the way she looked around the bank before kissing me. I should have noticed how quickly she put the transaction receipt in her purse, how she changed the subject when I asked about meeting with contractors. I should have wondered why someone so grateful for my trust was already making plans that didn't include me in the details. But I was 63, and in love for the first time since I was 25. I was building something with someone who looked at me like I was capable of more than just processing claims and surviving disasters. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was part of something bigger than my own small, careful existence. I thought we were creating our future together. I didn't know I was funding hers alone. It started with small things. The way Nari would flip her phone face down whenever she set it on the table. How she'd step away to take calls, speaking in rapid Thai that she never bothered to translate. The way she'd suddenly stop mid-sentence when her phone buzzed, checking the message with an expression I couldn't read. "Everything okay?" I asked one morning after she'd spent 5 minutes typing on her phone instead of eating the breakfast I'd made. "Just retreat business. So many details to coordinate." She smiled and put the phone aside, but kept glancing at it throughout our meal. I wanted to believe her. The retreat center project was moving forward slowly, but moving. We'd signed the land lease, met with contractors, even started interviewing potential staff. But something felt different between us. A distance that hadn't been there before. "Who was that?" I asked when she hung up from a call that had lasted 20 minutes, all of it in Thai. "My cousin Malay. She's helping with some of the permits. Family connections make everything easier here. Maybe I should meet her, if she's going to be involved in the business. She's very traditional, not comfortable around foreigners yet. Give her time." That was the first time I heard about cousin Malay. Over the next few weeks, Malay became the explanation for everything: delayed permits, missing contractors, the reason Nari had to stay out late or leave early or disappear for entire afternoons. "I might not come over tonight," Nari said one Thursday, not meeting my eyes. "Molly needs help with some family issues." "Is everything all right? Maybe I could help." "It's very personal, cultural things you wouldn't understand." She kissed my cheek quickly. "Don't wait up for me." She didn't come home that night. Or the next. When she finally appeared Friday evening, she looked exhausted, her usual careful composure slightly frayed. "How's your cousin doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Better. Thank you for being patient with me, Doug. I know this is hard on us." I wanted to ask more questions, but something in her expression warned me not to push. Instead, I held her while she showered, massaged her shoulders while she fell asleep against my chest, told myself that relationships required trust and patience. The weekend brought new problems. Our contractor called to say he needed another installment before he could continue work. 300,000 baht, due immediately or the project would be delayed another month. "I can transfer it Monday morning," I said, but Nari shook her head. "He needs it today. Cash. These local guys don't trust banks for large amounts." She was already reaching for her keys. "I can handle it if you give me access to your account." Something cold touched the base of my spine. "I'd rather handle the transfer myself. We can go to the bank together." "The bank is closed, Doug, and he's waiting at the job site right now." Her voice carried a note of impatience I'd never heard before. "Do you trust me or not?" The question hung between us like a challenge. Of course I trusted her. We were partners. We were building something together. But the way she was looking at me, like my hesitation was a personal insult, made my chest tight. "Of course I trust you." I wrote down my account information, watching her copy the numbers with careful precision. "Just get a receipt, okay? For our records." Always thinking like an insurance man. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'll be back in a few hours." She was gone for 6 hours. When she returned, she seemed lighter, more like herself, full of updates about the contractor's progress and plans for the next phase of construction. "How did the payment go?" I asked. "Perfect. He was so grateful, he's agreed to finish the main building 2 weeks early." She showed me photos on her phone, concrete being poured, walls taking shape. "Look how beautiful it's going to be." I studied the photos, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. The construction looked legitimate, professional. Maybe I was being paranoid, letting my ex-wife's accusations about trust issues color a perfectly normal business transaction. "Did you get that receipt?" He said he'd have it ready Monday. Different accounting system than we're used to. She curled up against me on the couch. "I'm sorry I was gone so long. Malay needed to talk through some things." "About the family issues?" "Her boyfriend is giving her trouble." She needed advice. Nari's fingers traced patterns on my chest. I told her what you always tell me, that good relationships are built on trust and communication. I wanted to believe her. The photos of construction progress, her familiar warmth against my side, the way she looked at me when she talked about our future together, all of it felt real. But something nagging at the back of my mind kept asking why a cash transaction required a 6-hour absence, why I'd never met this cousin who seemed to need so much help, why Nari's phone was always face down now. Maybe we should have dinner with Molly sometime, I suggested. I'd like to meet the family that's helping us. Soon, Nari murmured, already half asleep. When things calmed down. But things didn't calm down. If anything, they got more complicated. More late-night calls, more urgent trips to help with permits or family crises, more requests for cash payments that couldn't wait for normal banking hours. And through it all, Nari's phone stayed face down, her messages stayed private, and Cousin Malay remained conveniently unavailable to meet the foreign partner who was funding their family's dreams. I kept telling myself that I was adapting to a different culture, that business worked differently in Thailand, that love meant trusting your partner even when you didn't understand all the details. But late at night, lying in bed while Nari slept beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. Something that would explain why the woman who had once shared every thought with me was now living behind a locked screen I was never allowed to see. The night market in Chiang Mai had become our routine. Every Saturday, we'd walk through the maze of food stalls and craft vendors, Nari chatting with locals in Thai while I tried to keep up with the rapid-fire conversations. I loved watching her in those moments, how easily she moved between languages, how warmly people responded to her. It made me feel like I was seeing the real Thailand, not just the tourist version. We were buying fruit from our usual vendor when everything shifted. The old woman behind the mango display looked up as we approached, her face breaking into a wide smile. "Dao," she called out, waving enthusiastically. "I haven't seen you in weeks. How is business?" I felt Nari stiffen beside me, her hand tightening on my arm. She responded quickly in Thai, her voice carrying a tone I'd never heard before, sharp, almost warning. The vendor looked confused, glancing between Nari and me with obvious uncertainty. She said something else in Thai, pointing at me, and Nari cut her off with a swift shake of her head. "What did she call you?" I asked as we walked away, our usual bag of mangoes forgotten. "Dao. It's an old nickname. From when I was a teenager." Nari's voice was carefully controlled. "She gets confused sometimes. Very old woman. She seemed to know you pretty well. Asked about business. I used to help her with her English when I first started teaching tourists. She remembers me from back then." Nari linked her arm through mine, steering us toward a different section of the market. "You know how it is in small communities. Everyone knows everyone." I wanted to accept the explanation, but something in the vendor's expression had looked like recognition, not confusion. And the way she'd asked about business, like she expected Nari to have news to share, like they had ongoing conversations about work. We continued through the market, but the easy rhythm we usually fell into was broken. Nari seemed tense, distracted, checking her phone more frequently than usual. When a young Western man approached us near the clothing stalls, I thought he was just another tourist looking for directions. "Excuse me," he said, his accent marking him as Australian. "Doug, right? I'm Kevin. We met briefly at the wellness center a few weeks ago." I vaguely remembered him at 40s, traveling alone, had taken a few of Nari's classes. "Right, Kevin. How's your stay going?" He glanced at Nari, who was suddenly very interested in a display of silk scarves, then back at me. "Could I talk to you for a minute? Privately?" Nari looked up sharply. "I'll just be over here looking at these beautiful scarves," she said, her smile bright but brittle. Kevin waited until she was out of earshot, then turned to me with an expression I couldn't read. "Look, mate, I don't know you well, and maybe I'm overstepping, but..." He ran his hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. "I've been in Thailand for 2 years now. I've seen a lot of situations like yours." "Situations like mine?" "Older Western men, younger Thai women, lots of talk about business partnerships and investment opportunities." He looked over at Nari, who was pretending to examine fabric. I'm not saying she's running a scam, but the woman you're with, I knew her before she started teaching yoga. My chest tightened. What do you mean? She used to work the bar scene in Bangkok, high-end places catering to foreign businessmen. I'm not judging, everyone does what they need to survive. But if you're putting money into something with her, you might want to do some checking. The world seemed to tilt slightly. You're mistaken. Nari's been teaching yoga for years. She's building a wellness retreat. Maybe she is now. People change. But the woman I knew in Bangkok went by Tao, and she was very good at making men feel like they were rescuing her. Kevin's voice was gentle but firm. Just be careful, okay? Get some independent legal advice before you invest too heavily. He walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing in the middle of the night market with my heart hammering against my ribs. Tao, the same name the mango vendor had used. What did he want? Nari asked, appearing at my side with a silk scarf in her hands. Just asking about yoga classes for his girlfriend. The lie came out automatically, but I was studying her face, looking for something I wasn't sure I wanted to find. He seems like trouble. Some foreigners in Thailand, they get jealous when they see successful relationships. She held up the scarf. Do you like this color? I thought it would look beautiful in our retreat center. Our retreat center. The phrase that usually filled me with excitement now felt hollow. I found myself really looking at the scarf for the first time. Expensive silk. Definitely not something we'd budgeted for decorating a wellness space that was still mostly concrete and dreams. That night, after Nari fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. 2 different people had called her Tao in one evening. Tao, who the mango vendor expected to have business news. Tao, who Kevin claimed had worked Bangkok's bar scene. I tried to reconcile that with the gentle yoga instructor who had patiently taught me to breathe again, who had listened to my stories with such genuine care, who had cried when I agreed to fund our shared dream. I rolled over to look at her sleeping profile, still beautiful in the dim light from the street. Her phone was on the nightstand, face down as always. I'd never asked to see it, never questioned her privacy, never doubted that the life she'd shared with me was complete and honest. But now, listening to her quiet breathing, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been living with a stranger, that the woman I'd fallen in love with was as carefully constructed as the silk scarves in the night market, beautiful, appealing, designed to make tourists feel like they'd found something authentic and valuable. I wanted to wake her up and ask directly, who is Tao? What business were you in before yoga? How much of what you've told me is true? But I was 63 years old, and I'd already invested more than money in this relationship. I'd invested hope, trust, and the carefully rebuilt pieces of my heart. So instead, I lay there in the dark, afraid to ask questions that might destroy the only peace I'd found since Linda left me, but equally afraid that I was already living in the ruins of something that had never been real at all. I hadn't planned to go to Nari's apartment. We always spent time at my Villa 8, was bigger, more comfortable, had better internet for the retreat planning. But she'd forgotten her laptop charger that morning, and I offered to pick it up while she handled some permits downtown. Just use the spare key under the Buddha statue by the door, she'd said, barely looking up from her phone. The charger should be on the kitchen counter. The apartment was in an older building near the university, up 3 flights of narrow stairs that smelled like cooking oil and incense. I'd only been there once before, briefly, and remembered it as small but tidy, with colorful cushions and the kind of decor that made tourists feel like they were experiencing authentic Thai living. But when I opened the door, I stepped into something that looked like a stage set being broken down after the show ended. The living room was mostly empty. No colorful cushions, no small Buddha statues, no photographs of family or friends, just a folding table, 2 plastic chairs, and a stack of boxes against one wall. The kitchen counter held no laptop charger, just a folder of papers and what looked like several different passports. I should have left immediately. Should have called out for Nari, assumed I'd somehow gotten the wrong apartment, made excuses for what I was seeing. Instead, I found myself walking through the space like a man in a trance, trying to understand how the cozy home I remembered had become this empty shell. The bedroom was worse. A mattress on the floor, no sheets or blankets, a suitcase partially packed, sitting open like an interrupted escape, and on the single small table, more papers, organized in neat stacks with the kind of careful attention I recognized from my insurance work. I knew I shouldn't look. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to leave, to preserve whatever was left of my trust in Nari, to find some innocent explanation for why her apartment looked like a temporary crash pad rather than a home. But I looked anyway. The first stack was bank statements. Not Nari's accounts mine. Every wire transfer I'd made over the past 2 months, printed out and organized by date. 500,000 baht for the land deposit. 300,000 for the contractor. Smaller amounts for equipment, permits, marketing materials, numbers that added up to more money than I'd ever spent on anything except buying my house in Denver. The second stack made my knees weak. Visa applications. 3 different sets with 3 different men's names, all requesting fiancé visas to Australia, the UK, and the United States. Each application had photos attached Nari smiling beside men I didn't recognize, all of them older, all of them Western, all of them looking at the camera with the same hopeful expression I probably wore in the photos on my own phone. The third stack was the worst. Bank records showing transfers from accounts I didn't recognize, always followed within days by transfers out to an account listed under the name Dow Rakani. Money flowing in and out in a pattern that looked exactly like what Kevin had warned me about foreign money being collected and redirected over and over again. I sat down hard on the plastic chair, the papers scattered across the folding table in front of me. Everything I'd believed about Nari, about us, about the life we were building together, all of it was there in black and white, organized with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. My phone buzzed with a text from her. Found the charger in my bag. Don't worry about the apartment. See you tonight. I stared at the message, then at the evidence spread in front of me. She'd known I was coming here. Had sent me here deliberately, with a story about a forgotten charger that she'd had with her all along. She'd wanted me to see this. But why? The sound of footsteps on the stairs made me freeze. Heavy steps, definitely not Nari's. I quickly put the papers back in their stacks, trying to arrange them exactly as I'd found them, my hands shaking with adrenaline and something that felt like panic. The footsteps passed the door and continued up to the 4th floor. I was alone with the evidence of my own stupidity, alone with the realization that everything I'd invested in emotionally and financially was part of a pattern I'd been too blind to see. I left the apartment exactly as I'd found it, locking the door with the spare key and replacing it under the Buddha statue. Walking back to my villa, I felt like I was moving through water, every step requiring tremendous effort. The familiar streets of Chiang Mai looked different now, like I was seeing them through someone else's eyes, the eyes of just another foreign man who'd been carefully selected and systematically harvested. Back home, I sat in my living room staring at the retreat center plans still spread across my coffee table. The careful architectural drawings, the business projections, the photo mock-ups of smiling people finding peace and healing in our shared vision. Had any of it been real? Or was it all just another folder in another apartment, another set of props designed to make another lonely man feel like he was building something meaningful? I tried to think back through our relationship, looking for clues I'd missed. The way she'd never let me handle the contractor payments directly. How I'd never actually met any of the people supposedly working on our project. The fact that in 3 months of partnership and romance, I'd never been introduced to a single person from her real Lifino friends, no family, no co-workers from before she met me. Even cousin Mali, I realized with a sick certainty, was probably just another story. Another character in the elaborate fiction Nari had constructed around my loneliness and my money. My phone buzzed again. Another message from her. Excited to show you the progress photos from the site tomorrow. Our dream is really coming together. I stared at the text until the words lost all meaning. Our dream, our future, our partnership. All of it had been singular from the beginning. Her dream, her future, her carefully planned extraction of everything I had left to give. The worst part wasn't the money, though that hurt. The worst part was remembering how grateful I'd felt, how lucky I'd thought I was to find someone who saw potential in me, who wanted to build something with me, who looked at my broken, 63-year-old heart and saw something worth saving. I'd been so afraid of dying alone that I'd paid someone to pretend I was worth loving. And the most pathetic part was that even now, sitting in my living room with the evidence still fresh in my mind, part of me wanted to believe there was some other explanation. Some reason why the woman who had taught me to breathe again would keep visa applications for other men in her bedside table, would organize my bank statements like business records, would live in an empty apartment that looked more like a temporary office than a home. But I wasn't stupid, just desperate. And desperation, I was learning, makes a man capable of believing almost anything if the alternative is admitting he's been living in a carefully constructed lie. I waited 3 days before I asked to see her. 3 days of pretending nothing had changed, of responding to her texts about contractor progress and permit updates, of watching her sleep beside me and wondering if anything about her was real. On the 4th morning, I couldn't stand it anymore. "I need to talk to you," I said over breakfast, my voice steadier than I felt. "Can we meet somewhere neutral? Not here, not your place. Somewhere we can have a real conversation." She looked up from her phone, and for just a moment I caught something in her expression. Not surprise, but resignation, like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Of course. Is everything all right, Doug? You've seemed distant lately? Let's meet at that cafe by the river, the one where we had our first real conversation. 2 o'clock. "I'll be there," she said, but she was already back to her phone, typing rapidly. I spent the morning walking through Chiang Mai, trying to decide what I actually wanted from this conversation. An explanation? An apology? My money back? Or just the truth, finally, about who she really was and what I'd really meant to her. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few tourists reading guidebooks and an old man feeding pigeons from the terrace. I chose a table with a view of the river, watching the brown water flow past while I waited for Nari to arrive. She was 15 minutes late, which was unusual for her. When she finally appeared, she looked different, more polished, more carefully put together than I'd ever seen her. Like she was dressed for a business meeting instead of a conversation with her partner and lover. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible." She settled into the chair across from me but didn't reach for my hand the way she usually did. "You sounded serious on the phone. What's going on?" I studied her face, looking for some trace of the woman who had cried when I agreed to fund our retreat center, who had held me while I talked about Linda and Sharon, who had made me feel like I was worth saving. But her eyes were different now, polite, distant, like she was looking at a stranger. "I went to your apartment yesterday." "I know. You left the key in the wrong place." Her voice was matter of fact, no trace of defensiveness or surprise. "I saw the visa applications, Nari. Or should I call you Dow?" She was quiet for a long moment, stirring sugar into her coffee with mechanical precision. When she looked up, her expression was almost gentle, like she was talking to a child who had finally figured out an obvious truth. "What do you want me to say, Doug?" "I want you to tell me what was real. Any of it. The retreat center, the partnership, the way you looked at me when you said you'd never felt safe with anyone before." My voice was getting louder, but I couldn't stop it. "I want you to tell me if you ever cared about me at all, or if I was just another mark." "You weren't a mark." She set down her spoon carefully. "You were exactly what you appeared to be. A kind man who was lonely and generous and needed to feel useful again. And you used that. I gave you what you needed. For 3 months, you felt loved, valued, important. You had a purpose, a project, someone who listened to your stories and made you feel like you mattered." She leaned forward slightly. "That wasn't fake, Doug. Your feelings were real. But yours weren't. My feelings were practical." She glanced out at the river, then back at me. "I have to take care of myself. I've been doing it since I was 16, and I've learned that survival requires flexibility. Is that what you call it? Flexibility? I call it adapting to the opportunities that present themselves. Her voice stayed calm, almost clinical. You wanted to believe you were rescuing someone? You wanted to feel needed, to build something meaningful with a woman who saw your value. I provided that experience. For a price. Everything has a price, Doug. The question is whether you feel like you got your money's worth. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Not anger, not defensiveness, not even guilt, just a businesslike assessment of services rendered and payment received. Was any of it real? The yoga classes? The way you listened when I talked about Linda and Sharon, the nights you held me when I couldn't sleep? The yoga classes were real? I am a certified instructor? She almost smiled. And I did listen to your stories. I'm good at listening. It's part of what I do. What about the retreat center? Is any of that actually happening? Some of it. I did lease the land. I did hire contractors. Whether it becomes a wellness center or gets sold to developers depends on how much capital I can raise. She shrugged. Your investment was helpful, but not sufficient for the full vision. I felt something cold settling in my chest. The other men, in the visa applications. Insurance. This business has uncertainties. It's wise to have multiple options. Business. That's what this was to you. Business. What did you think it was, Doug? For the first time, her composure cracked slightly. Did you really believe that a 28-year-old Thai woman fell in love with a 63-year-old American tourist because of his sparkling personality and emotional availability? The words hit like physical blows. Everything I'd told myself about our connection, about the way she'd looked at me, about the possibility that love could happen at any age, all of it, crumbled under the weight of her matter-of-fact assessment. I stopped, realizing how pathetic it would sound to say what I'd actually thought. You thought what every lonely foreign man thinks when a young woman pays attention to him, that you were special, that you'd found something real in a place where nothing is what it seems. She finished her coffee and stood up. I'm not cruel, Doug. I gave you 3 months of feeling valued and loved. That's more than most people get. She walked away without looking back, leaving me sitting alone by the river with the ruins of everything I'd believed about love, about myself, about the possibility that a broken man could find peace in a foreign country with a woman who saw something worth saving in his damaged heart. I watched her disappear into the crowd of tourists and locals, and I knew I'd never see her again. Not the real her, anyway. I'd never known the real her to begin with. The numbers were brutal when I finally added them up. 1,100,000 baht over 3 months. About 32,000 American dollars, transferred in careful installments that hadn't seemed overwhelming individually, but had gutted my retirement savings when viewed as a whole. The land lease that might or might not exist, the contractor payments for construction I'd never actually seen, the equipment purchases for a retreat center that was probably just another folder in another empty apartment. But the money wasn't the worst part. Money could be earned back, budgets could be rebuilt, retirement could be delayed. What Nari had taken was something I couldn't replace at 63 years old, my capacity to trust my own judgment about love. I spent the first week after our cafe meeting trying to reconstruct the relationship like an insurance claim, looking for evidence of when the deception began and when I should have seen it. But the more I analyzed it, the more I realized there had never been a moment when Nari stopped being herself and started being a con artist. The con artist was who she was. The gentle yoga instructor, the vulnerable woman who needed rescuing, the grateful partner who cried over my generosity, all of it had been performance, carefully calibrated to match exactly what my loneliness required. I gave you what you needed, she'd said. And she was right. I had needed to feel useful, valued, capable of inspiring love in someone young and beautiful. I had needed to believe that my failed marriage to Linda was an aberration, not a reflection of some fundamental inadequacy in my character. I had needed to think that, At 63, I could still be the kind of man a woman would choose, not just tolerate. Nari had studied me with the precision of a claims adjuster, identifying exactly what kind of damage I'd sustained and what kind of repair I was desperate enough to pay for. The yoga classes to address my obvious stress and depression, the patient listening sessions to make me feel heard after Linda's years of criticism, the careful vulnerability that made me feel needed instead of needy. Even the business partnership, which appealed to my desire to be productive and purposeful instead of just another retired tourist drinking himself to death in Southeast Asia. She'd been brilliant, really, never asking for money directly, never pressuring me to invest more than I offered. Just creating situations where my own generosity and desire to be important would naturally lead to the financial outcomes she needed. Every wire transfer had been my idea, my suggestion, my desperate attempt to prove that I was worth the love she was pretending to feel. The worst part was that I couldn't even hate her for it. She'd told me the truth in that final conversation. She'd given me 3 months of feeling valued and loved, and that was more than I'd gotten from my marriage to Linda or my relationships with anyone else in the past decade. The fact that it was a purchased experience didn't make the feelings any less real while I was having them, but it made everything that came after feel poisoned. Every time I remembered the way she'd looked at me when I talked about Sharon's death, I had to wonder if she was calculating how much vulnerability would translate to generosity. Every time I thought about the nights she'd held me while I couldn't sleep, I had to question whether her gentleness was genuine care or professional technique. Every moment of intimacy, every shared laugh, every quiet conversation in the garden of it was now suspect, contaminated by the knowledge that her attention had been a commodity I'd been paying for without realizing it. I tried to be angry. Anger would have been clean, energizing, something I could use to move forward, but I wasn't angry at Nari. I was angry at myself for being so desperate for connection that I'd ignored every warning sign, dismissed every red flag, rationalized every inconsistency because the alternative was admitting that I was alone again. Kevin had tried to warn me. The mango vendor had called her by a different name. Her phone was always face down, her apartment nearly empty, her stories about family and permits and contractors never quite adding up. I'd seen all of it and chosen to believe her explanations because believing meant I got to keep feeling loved. That's what she'd really taken from me, not just money, but my ability to trust myself to recognize real love when I found it. Every future relationship would be haunted by the question, are they here for me or for what I can provide? Every gesture of affection would be analyzed, every expression of need scrutinized for signs of manipulation. At 63, I'd learned that my heart was a commodity that could be expertly harvested by someone with the right skills and enough patience. That my loneliness was so obvious, so desperate, that it could be monetized by a woman young enough to be my daughter. That everything I thought I knew about love and connection and mutual care could be simulated so perfectly that I'd never know the difference until the performance ended. Nari hadn't stolen my money. She'd stolen my faith in my own ability to distinguish between authentic affection and professional service. She'd taught me that at my age, with my needs, with my obvious hunger for validation, I was no longer a man who could be loved just, a client who could be managed. And the most devastating part was that she'd done it with such skill, such apparent care, that even knowing the truth, I still missed her. Still woke up reaching for her warmth, still caught myself wanting to share small moments with her, still felt the absence of her voice teaching me how to breathe. She'd given me exactly what I'd paid for, the experience of feeling loved, but she'd also shown me that at 63, that might be the only kind of love I could afford. 6 months later, I'm living in a smaller apartment near Wat Chedi Luang, one of Chiang Mai's oldest temples. The villa I'd rented for our shared future became too expensive after I calculated what was left of my savings. This place is simpler, quieter, with just enough space for one person who's learning to be alone without feeling lonely. I sold most of the furniture I'd accumulated during those hopeful months with Nari. The retreat center plans, the business projections, The architectural drawings, all of it, went into a box that I dropped off at a local recycling center. Some dreams are too heavy to carry forward. My routine now is different. I wake up at 5:30, not because an alarm forces me to, but because the monks at the temple begin their morning chants, and the sound has become part of my internal clock. I make coffee, sit on my small balcony, and watch the city come alive. No yoga classes, no meditation sessions, no wellness programs, just the simple practice of being present in my own life without needing someone else to validate the experience. I still think about Nari. Not every day, but often enough that I've stopped trying to push the memories away. She was right about one thing: the feelings I had were real, even if her responses were performed. The peace I felt in her presence, the hope I carried about our future together, the sense of purpose that came from building something with another person, none of that was false, even though the foundation it was built on was constructed from lies. But I've learned to distinguish between the experience and the person who provided it. I can miss the feeling of being needed without missing Nari specifically. I can regret the money I lost without regretting the 3 months of feeling like I mattered to someone. The grief isn't for her, it's for the version of myself that was naive enough to believe that loneliness could be cured by someone else's attention. I've started volunteering at a local school, teaching English to children whose families can't afford private lessons. It's not the grand partnership I'd imagined with the retreat center, but it's real work that helps real people. The kids don't need me to be anything other than patient and consistent. They don't care about my romantic failures or my bank account or my need to feel important. They just want to learn English so they can have better opportunities than their parents had. One of the monks at the temple, Fra Chai, speaks enough English that we sometimes have conversations after the evening prayers. He's never asked about my story, never probed into why a 63-year-old American moved to a small apartment near a Buddhist temple. But one evening, watching me struggle with meditation, he offered an observation that cut straight through my defenses. Western people often come to Thailand looking for something, he said, his voice gentle but direct. They think they need to find peace, find love, find purpose, but these things cannot be found outside. They can only be recognized inside. What if there's nothing inside worth recognizing? I asked. Then you practice recognition until there is. I've been practicing recognition for 6 months now. Recognizing when I'm reaching for my phone to text someone who won't respond. Recognizing when I'm creating stories about people's motivations instead of accepting their actions at face value. Recognizing when my need for validation is stronger than my commitment to truth. Most mornings, I still wake up reaching for Nari's warmth before I remember she was never really there. But the remembering comes faster now, and it hurts less. Not because I've stopped caring about connection, but because I've started understanding the difference between being loved and purchasing the experience of feeling loved. I don't date. I don't join expatriate social groups or seek out other lonely Westerners looking for purpose in Southeast Asia. I don't avoid human connection, but I don't pursue it with the desperation that made me such an easy target for someone like Nari. I've learned that my value as a person doesn't depend on someone else's willingness to perform affection for me. The monks have a phrase, sama ditti, which roughly translates to right understanding. It means seeing things as they actually are, not as we need them to be or fear they might be. I'm practicing sama ditti with my memories of Nari, with my loneliness, with my need to matter to someone else. Sometimes, walking past the wellness center where we met, I wonder if she's still in Chiang Mai or if she's moved on to a different city, a different country, a different lonely man who needs to feel rescued. I wonder if the retreat center ever got built, if any of the money I invested actually went toward something real. But these aren't questions that keep me awake anymore. They're just curiosities about a life that intersected with mine briefly and then diverged toward destinations I'll never know. I've learned that healing doesn't require understanding everything that hurt you. Sometimes it just requires accepting that some people come into your life to teach you something about yourself, even when the lesson is painful and the teacher never intended to help you learn. Nari taught me that my loneliness was so profound, so obvious, that it could be read and exploited by someone skilled in recognizing emotional needs. But she also taught me that I'm capable of caring deeply, of investing completely in another person's well-being, of building something meaningful with someone I love. The fact that she didn't deserve that investment doesn't make the capacity any less valuable. I'm 63 years old, living alone in a foreign country with significantly less money than I had a year ago. By most measures, I should feel like a failure. But sitting on my balcony this morning, listening to the temple bells and watching the sun rise over a city that has become home, I feel something I haven't felt in years. Contentment that doesn't depend on anyone else's presence or approval. I'm still learning to breathe again, but now I'm teaching myself.